background on me in your newsletter, I think, Meredith. Yes, that came through. And so I thought I might just, unless you have some questions for me about my experience and exposure, I'm just actually not going to talk about any particular cancer. I'm actually just going to talk about grief and loss today. So, and I think that is probably applicable to many things in our lives, not just really, not actually a diagnosis of cancer only or death, but of course that is the thing that when we hear the diagnosis of cancer, the big C word, we automatically associate that with death. And that is almost a concurrent feeling and interpretation that happens as soon as that occurs. And therefore we almost start experiencing that loss at that time, almost from the instant of the diagnosis. So I guess I'm assuming to both those who have a diagnosis and their carers. Meredith, have I got the mix here? Or
yeah, I think a lot are more carers, but if we can present this for both, please.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So, well, I'll just be talking generally about grief and loss. So, yeah, so I guess it can pull out from it what is appropriate for you. The first thing I guess to remember is that grief and loss are often, the terms are used interchangeably, but grief is actually the feeling associated with the loss, but they happen so fast that we do use them interchangeably. All of us will have experienced loss at some point in our lives. They vary from a loss of a relationship, loss of a career, loss of I guess a pet, which is very, very significant for a number of people. But of course, the biggest loss that we can ever experience is the loss of somebody physically, so the death of somebody, or the loss of health. And that could be our own or someone else who's dear to us. Grief is a feeling associated with this loss. And this is a normal response for any human being. The grief is, it can be intense, it can be long lasting. Most importantly, we have to keep in mind that it's a natural and functional response. Why is it functional? So many of us, when we're going through grieving, feel ourselves to be non-functional. We get really sucked into that spiral, the downward spiral. But if we can take a step back and just think about why we call it functional, it actually allows us to mourn in many different ways. And I'll go through some of those ways as well. But it allows us to mourn. And because we mourn, we can eventually come through the grief and adjust to our new life after the loss. So everyone reacts differently to grief. So if you are a person who's got a diagnosis of cancer, your grieving will be the loss of your health. It will also be the loss of, I guess, future anticipatory grief, which is anticipating death, anticipating the cancer deteriorating, making you more ill, anticipating the chemotherapy and the treatment that is given to you. So you start that grieving process right from the get-go. How does grieving affect us? It's obviously it's individual. Everybody will be different, and everybody will be influenced by different things and different elements of their life. You can be influenced by the circumstances of the death or the circumstances of the loss. Your unique relationship with the deceased. So if the person who has died or is about to, because of course what I'm talking about relates to not just after death, but also the process leading up, because that is all part of that grieving process. I think sometimes we think of grief as being only after somebody has died. But actually we start grieving, whether we are the person with the diagnosis or carer or a family member, we start grieving from the beginning. So it's really important to remember that and to allow ourselves to accept that. So the unique relationship, as I said, to go back to that particular point with the person would be us. If we are the person, we are unique to ourselves. Obviously, we are a unique human being. Can we accept that, and can we work through that as we go through our cancer diagnosis? the personality and the coping behaviors that we or family members have. How have we coped with the difficulties in the past? How have we coped with setbacks? Do we fall apart? Is there any resilience that's built in? One curious thing about resilience is that people talk about building resilience. And you know, I tend to do an awful lot of training on building resilience for people, especially through the pandemic and post-pandemic, if we can call it that now. And yet, one key message that is really difficult to absorb is that resilience only comes through adversity. Resilience does not happen if things go right in your life, because you have no need for resilience. So resilience will only occur if you have encountered setbacks in your life. And so therefore, the more setbacks you have, the more adversity you face, big or small, that will allow you to cope with whatever it is you're facing now, much more in a much more helpful, perhaps constructive manner. What was your previous history of loss? That also builds up resilience. A key factor here in how you cope with grief is whether you can seek and receive help. And that is where the support mechanisms that you have around you, the support groups that you attend, are uniquely important. Part of that is your social support, family and friends. And of course, we all know that health and lifestyle play a hugely important part in our ability to cope with adversity. So that includes, you know, adversity comes in so many shapes and forms in our lives. But if we start to think about some of these elements, our relationship with the person who's died, our relationship with ourselves, do we value ourselves? What is our personality? Have we had previous experience of loss? Can we seek help? Or do we like to just give help? What is our social support? How do we look after ourselves from a health and lifestyle perspective? All of these will help influence how we actually cope at a time of intense grief. So grief feels often like a roller coaster, and I'm sure we have all experienced it at some stage in our lives. You're here because we are coming together after there have been a series of losses in the community. Quite a few people have died. And grief feels like a bit of a roller coaster, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The really important thing to understand is that, again, I repeat, these experiences are normal. This roller coaster ride is completely normal. We often feel, and the message given by society so often is also just push through it. You should be feeling better now. 6 months has passed. 2 months has passed. Several weeks. Why are you still upset? Why are you still grieving? There seems to be a need for society to place a time limit on how long we grieve for. That is only because a lot of people are really uncomfortable with the idea of grief being around them, somebody grieving, somebody being sad. In fact, that whole message of positivity is something that is so promoted in society that we are not even allowed to feel sad for anything. It's look on the bright side. Every cloud has a silver lining. I recently read an inversion of that every cloud has a silver lining, which really caught my eye. It said, every silver lining has a cloud. And I really like that, because I think it emphasizes that life is not one big happy journey. Life comes with its ups and downs, and we accept it in all its guises, in all the shades and different experiences that we go through. So remember, it's not the silver lining in the cloud, it's both together, the cloud and the silver lining, that we incorporate into our lives through the grief. So I'm going to briefly touch on some of the commonly experienced grief responses, and then also talk a little bit about I guess how people conceptualize grief. And you might have heard of some of these theories around grief and how you cope with it. So some of the common grief responses are, obviously, there's a lot of shock. There's confusion, there's disbelief, there's numbness. Can't believe it's happening. If it's a diagnosis, then it's why me? Sometimes it's questioning faith, if people have that in their lives. Sometimes they also can't believe it's happening. Is it really happening to me? And for a period of time, there's some denial. So then we make an effort to go on with life normally, bury our head in the sand, you know, do the traditional ostrich bit, and try and pretend it's not happening. We might go through some emotional release. We might be crying. We might, throw a temper tantrum. We might get irritable with others. We might find ourselves snapping easily. We also tend to feel quite alone. Life feels quite pointless. What's the use of trying? Sometimes there is also, and this is an unusual one, sometimes there's also anger at the person who's died. It's, how dare you go away and leave me? I now have to cope with things on my own. And that too is really normal. The difficulty is when we go through that, we often feel guilty that we are feeling angry at the person who's died. So there's this mixture of resentment and anger, but also we also feel guilty. Why are we feeling angry? So there's this whole mix of emotions around the grieving process. Sometimes there are physical changes, so you might find yourself eating less or eating more. Comfort eating is a big one. Sleeping less or disrupted sleep routines. Fatigue during the day. Tired when you shouldn't be feeling tired. You know you haven't done much, but you're still fatigued. Fatigue is a totally different to being physically tired. Fatigue is something that you feel through the bones in your body. It's almost as if you can't move, like you're wrapped in cotton wool or a fog, and you can't actually come out of it. That's the sense you get when you have fatigue. People equate fatigue with I'm just tired, but being tired, you can flip out of that relatively easily. Fatigue is harder to flip out because it's so often so bone deep. And often there is difficulty concentrating on the task in front of you. You might find yourself looking at a screen or at a book and never turning a page and never reading the words on the screen. You're just sitting there. And 10 minutes later, you wonder, what the heck was that about? What was I doing? And that's how some of the physical distress and the emotional distress combines in terms of how you deal with things in everyday life. So the stuff that you might see some of these in yourself or in others. And you might find that if you reflect back, some of these grief responses, you can pinpoint when they're happening, and perhaps it makes a little bit of sense for you as to why. So try to avoid critically, obviously the obvious things to avoid are alcohol and drugs to dull pain. That's often quite common. Try to not respond to the emotions, which are this roller coaster ride and often quite intense, intensely high or intensely low, with dangerous or risky behavior. So, going out, I guess, in risky situations, or thinking it doesn't matter, I don't need to take care of myself, we know what's going to happen, or this person has left me and it doesn't matter what I do to myself now. Try not to take your feelings out on others. Irritability is a part of the spectrum of emotions, and it's really normal to feel irritated when somebody, particularly when friends around us or family members start to talk about things that seem unimportant. This is another big one. And, somebody brings up something that is not life-threatening or significant, and you think, what are you talking about? I've just been through, either massive treatment or a cancer diagnosis, or I've just lost somebody, and you're talking about, you know, I don't know, buying a new dress, okay, or a haircut, and you're upset about that, and you begin to get really irritated because it seems so unimportant. And that again is part of that grieving process. Try not to bottle things up, and don't hide your feelings. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the models that we use. And I say models, I don't mean to go into theory. I just really want to normalize some of the cycle, the roller coaster ride, and the one that you've probably heard of. Certainly, I would imagine of one, and perhaps not the other model. So the first model that I'm going to just put up on the screen, I'm going to share that with you, is Kubler-Ross's model. So that's a fairly common one and been around for a very long time. In fact, I can't actually remember the year anymore. It's been around so long. But it does show that roller coaster ride, even though it goes in a very linear fashion, in some way. Okay, so I'm going to show that first, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, can you all see that, Meredith? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. So this is a Kubler-Ross grief cycle, and as I said, I'm sure you've heard of that, and I mentioned some of these words before. This is what people go through. So you might start, and she said that she started off by talking about it being in a very fairly linear manner. So you go through this one at a time. I think later she actually changed that to say you can go backwards and forwards through it. And remember, that is the way we live. We don't live in a linear manner. We make decisions and we revise them. We go one step forward, we got 2 steps back. So this is put just as a way of expressing and explaining the sort of emotions that go at these different stages. So you see denial is there, there's anger. Denial is avoidance, confusion, shock, fear, anger, frustration, irritation, anxiety. So anxiety sits under all these sit under the umbrella of anger. People think they're irritated, but they're not angry, but it's actually low-level anger. There's depression, which sometimes shows itself in the part of that fight-flight syndrome. So you have anger sometimes is a fight. Depression might be flight. I'm running away. So I'll either run away and hide, or I'll run away and have a holiday somewhere and pretend that none of this is happening. I can feel overwhelmed in depression as well, and also helpless. Helplessness is a big part because sometimes there is no answer. We are, as human beings, we really like having solutions. And sometimes what we are faced with in the process of loss has no answer, no solution. There's bargaining, reaching out to others, struggling to find meaning. Why me? Why this person in my family? Why somebody who is good? So often we hear the phrase only the good die young, and I don't know that that's true. But these things are tossed around as if we have to find meaning in what happens. Sometimes we can actually let go and not seek to find meaning. Sometimes we can think that we can realize and acknowledge that our need to find meaning is our need. It's not necessary to heal, to find meaning in things. And that's a curious thing, because people have often, there are so many people who are able to find meaning through things like fundraising and starting up charities, etc. And that's great if they can do that. But if you can't, don't feel that you need to. And I think it's that black and white thinking, that dichotomy that exists quite often. If you can't find meaning, there must be meaning somewhere. Is there meaning to everything we do in life? Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes the meaning is it just is. And then acceptance is about exploring options and moving on. Okay. And you can put a new plan in place, even if there is death ahead. What's the new plan? What will I do? How do I prepare for dying? I mean, something that has been so new in the field of grief and loss is also preparing for dying, and that's something that I think is really wonderful. Having had to have those conversations so often with people and with family members, it's wonderful that it's being acknowledged as something we could all do and learn about. Okay.
Sorry, Crystal, can I just ask there, where you say planning, what is the sort of things that people would be planning as far as, yes.
As far as death is concerned, it will be around how they want to die, where they want to die, actual location, who do they want around them. I've actually had clients who have had their how can I put it? I won't say funeral, but a memorial before they actually die. So they've invited friends around, they've given things away to friends dear friends and family members that they wanted to see them have, and they've had that before they died. And there's a few clients of mine that I've had, nothing to do with me, this is their idea, but it was wonderful. The family shared with me later how wonderful it was to see that they actually saw the joy on families, on the faces when they gave them. Yes, there's sadness, but there's also joy that they could actually connect through. And you don't have to wait for the funeral and the will to be read out and the estate to be divided or whatever it is to know, you have something that is given to you as a memory from the person themselves. So there's that as well. There's, of course, things like planning might be guardianship, might be children being taken care of, might be a whole lot of things.
Thanks.
So,
yep.
Okay, the more I'd say recent, but it's not that recent. It's just more recent than Kubler-Ross model is the Strobe-and-Schutz model, dual process of grieving. And I will just enlarge this a bit. Okay. Can everyone see that? Meredith, yes?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. So this is a process model of how we cope with grief and loss and bereavement. And this is called sort of an oscillating model. So it's a model where you move between loss-oriented thinking and restoration-oriented thinking. And there's no particular time frame that is given to this. They didn't say that you'll find this happening for you in the first 2 weeks or the first month or the first 6 months. There is no time frame, and you might find that as time goes on, this happens to you fairly naturally. The key thing to remember is that it's normal. Of course, everything I'm saying is to really highlight the fact that the different ways in which we cope and the different responses we have are normal. The different ways we cope may not be normal. Okay, I've said that now as a mistake. So everyday life experiences, this is how you live every day. Then you'll have loss-oriented thinking. Loss-oriented thinking are when you think about your loved one and their death, thoughts, feelings, and actions that allow you to focus on the pain. You might look at old photos, you might have a particular memory recall, you might have a birthday or a celebration, a particular day that means something to you with them. And that is loss-oriented work. Restoration-oriented thinking is when you get on with your daily life. And when I said earlier, you might find yourself doing that quite early on, that's okay. It distracts you from your grief for a while. You might find yourself watching TV, a TV program, and you realize you haven't thought about the loss for a while. The critical thing to remember here is that when you move into that restoration-oriented, again, many people feel guilty. If you recall, I mentioned guilt with the anger. People also feel guilt with forgetting. And so if they have even temporarily forgotten the person they've lost, or forgotten the diagnosis, if that's what it is, then they suddenly think, how could I actually enjoy myself? How could I forget? There's these massive changes in my life. There's huge things have happened in my life, and I've actually forgotten and I've sat there laughing at a comedy show. Okay, and it does happen. It's actually a way to distract yourself from your grief, and it's actually a natural way of coping. So when people have, in the past, we've talked very much about working through grief, or people will say, face it, suck it up, get on with it, life, get on with life. We don't think either of those extremes are actually true. Strobe should believe that this oscillating model, the way we move between the two halves of of grieving over losing somebody, but restoration and restoring our lives is actually the way most people handle it. So it is okay to distract ourselves from grief. It's okay to do new things. It's okay to have a period of avoidance. We don't have to make ourselves feel all the time. And sometimes we can find ourselves consciously thinking we might have a period of real grief when the grief has intruded into our everyday lives. We've seen something that brings on a bout of crying and suddenly think, okay, that's enough. I need to get on with, I don't know, clean the kitchen. And that too is okay. That's you consciously being aware of that need to move away from it for a while, because the grief can be so overwhelming that it actually stops you from functioning. It can stop you from functioning. So the restoration model looks at what do you need to, what can you do to put some functioning back into your life. So I think this is quite a helpful way. It's not, it's as opposed to Kubler-Ross, who I frequent her. She was the first person who ever thought about the grieving going in stages, and allowed us to understand in those very initial times, when grieving was acknowledged, was how we work with it and how we deal with it. I think Strobenschutt is another way of looking at it, and perhaps a more practical way, and it gives people permission to move on, even if it's only in small stages, to move on with their lives. I think that's one thing perhaps in society we are not allowed to do really too much of, give ourselves permission. We always seem to need others to give permission, and there's so much judgment around. But if we can just give ourselves permission to really know that the loss is okay, but so is getting on with our lives, okay. And that's I think can be quite helpful. Okay, I thought maybe want to open up to questions, and if people want to have some examples of specific type of coping strategies and rituals. I often get asked about rituals and whether they are meaningful and whether they are important, and I actually believe they are. Rituals are very, very meaningful. So memorial services, funerals, informal gatherings, talking about somebody who is talking really about death here, talking about somebody who has died, also remembering them as they really were, not making them paragons of virtue or martyrs or wonderful people, because we all have our idiosyncrasies. We all can irritate others at times. So when you remember people, remember the funny parts, the loving parts, the nice parts, but also remember the not so nice parts, the parts that irritated you to bits. So think about them as real, not as saints, because none of us are saints. Create a tribute if you want, plant a tree. And this is where the things like the charity runs and the walks are so critical. That's the tributes to people that people have either come back from a diagnosis or they have lost somebody. That is really so important. I think that's about it.
That's wonderful. I had a question, which I know a lot of people say, that when you know that somebody is going to die and you can see them deteriorating, but when it actually happens, just dealing with that sort of shock of them not actually being there, are you able to talk through the ways to deal with that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I would say actually the way to deal with that is to, and this sounds, I don't know, it's probably happened already, but I would recommend to my clients that one of the ways to deal with that is to start talking to the person about dying as well. And I know there is a huge reluctance, and sometimes the person themselves doesn't want to talk about it. That's the denial that kicks in. I don't want to talk about it. But if you can, it's really talking about how you feel, how you're going to miss them, how difficult it must be for them, but also talk about share stories, share lives together, share past memories. Those are really, really important for both people. So there are two parts of this when someone's dying. There's the person who is dying, who wants to leave behind something, and then this person who's left behind. If that's okay with you, Meredith, I might talk about both aspects.
Yep, perfect.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay, so so the person who's dying often will wonder what they can do, particularly what they can do to leave behind for their family. And I've seen this very often when it's a parent with young children. What can I do so that they will remember me? And there's so much creativity around. You can write a journal. I know one person who wrote letters to her daughter about her journey, about what it was like, about what she'd like to see, would have loved to have seen for her daughter. One person wrote letters to herself and left that for her children to read. Somebody else did video clips. And sometimes it's video clips over a period of time with their children, just normal everyday stuff. Sometimes they've written a poem. So this is the person who is dying, who wants people to remember them. And there's huge loss there too, because they know they won't see their children grow up. They know they won't see them in a relationship, or grandchildren, or their future. And that's a huge loss for the person who is dying. There are ways in which they can learn, they can start to accept that. For those who are left behind, it's really about, I guess I will just share it's really about accepting the loss, but it's also about allowing yourself time, like that Strobel-Schutz model. One coping strategy that I've used with people quite a lot over the years is to actually develop a memory box. And a memory box is something that doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be expensive. I actually recommend just a shoebox and cover it with the paper or a color that you really love, okay, that you like. So this is your memories. Remember, this is your memories of the person. So in that box, you put things that remind you of the person who has died. So it could be something that nobody else would associate with that person. It may be, or maybe something uniquely that person. It could be a scarf, it could be a brooch, it could be a picture of the two of you together. Put that all in the box when, I guess, at a suitable time after the death. And then I suggest that you have a quiet time with the person who's died. Say a couple of times a week. Choose a time that is good for you. In other words, you don't have too many distractions, but don't do this last thing at night, because it is sad, and it's actually meant to be sad, but it's also meant to evoke happiness. And eventually it will do that if you allow yourself to stay with the sadness and then move into the restoration phase, which is the happier part. When you are with this person, and I said that with the person with the box in your hands, think about the person. Think about the person who's died and remember them as they really were. Look at the photo and think about what you did together. And as I said, choose things that remind you uniquely of this person. And then close the box and say, okay, I'm going to do this again. So I will meet you again on, say you started to do it on a Tuesday and Thursdays. On the Tuesday, you say, I will be with you again on Thursday at this time. And so doing that will sort of allow you to connect with the person who's died. It allow you to give you permission to do the sad things, okay, to feel sad. It allow you permission to feel sad, and allow you to do something that a lot of people think, well, it's really strange. Why would you actually encourage yourself to feel sad? Well, actually, I do the same thing with anxiety. I tell people to have a worry time. When they actually feel really worried about things, make themselves really worried about things. This is the time when you're allowing yourself to feel really sad, to really connect with that sadness, but you're also saying, I'm going to shut the box and I'm going to go back to whatever else I need to do, but I know I will come back to it on this day. So you're not actually forgetting, you're not avoiding, you're just putting it in a particular place in your life. Now, it won't stay that way. Initially, it'll be what we call grief intrusion. So the memories of the person will intrude into your everyday life. And sometimes it's quite useful to just say, okay, I'm feeling sad today, say to yourself, but I will actually see you again or be with you again on Thursday. So I'll wait till Thursday to actually remember my sadness. So you're not actually pushing it away. You're not avoiding, you're not denying it. You're just saying, I actually need to get on with what I'm doing right now, not with life even. I need to get on with what I'm doing right now. But I will allow myself to feel sad later. So I have found that when I've walked this process through with clients and they have tried it, that it actually does work in terms of, how can I put it, corralling. You're putting a sort of fence around the grieving. And even though it intrudes at other times, it also allows you to know that you have permission at these times. You give yourself permission. And at that time, you just let it go. Just stay sad. People ask me, how long should I do this? How long should each period be? And I say, usually about 20 to 20 minutes, no more. 30 minutes, perhaps max. 20 minutes at a time. You'll find that over a period of time, and I don't know how long it is, but usually it's a few months, that you do it, you need less time and you do it less often. So that's some of the strategies that I've actually worked through with clients, both those who are nearing death and those who have lost someone.
Wonderful, thank you. Sorry, I had a delivery at the front door. I had to.
Yes, the challenges of working from home. Anyone else with any questions? I guess, tell me if there's something more you want me to elaborate on, because, this is your hour.
Can I ask, I know you said there is no time limit for grieving, but when does it become problematic? Is there a time when, or, yeah. what do we look at to say, yeah, this has gone too long, this should not be happening, or you need to seek further help?
Yeah. I would rather look at complex grief in terms of how it shows itself in the person rather than a time frame. So if over a period of time the person is still unable to get back to work, is still unable to do daily routines around things around the house, is still unable to get back into a routine for themselves or care for others in there that they have to look after, and there's lots of this, the depression stays. There are long bouts of crying. So if that stays for a period of, none of that seems to be reduced or go away, then I would think that's complex grief. So rather than saying in 6 months, if you're still crying, you have complex grief, I would rather say in 6 months, if you're still crying uncontrollably, then and you're unable to move back into a normal routine, you can't get yourself out of bed, you can't get to work. So there's a range of things, and some of those will sit in the area of clinical depression as well, in terms of looking at things that you feel all day, every day for a period of time. So all of that needs to be looked at in terms of complex grief. There is such a thing, there is such a thing as complex grief, and there used to be a time frame for it. But I think the general thinking is now that it's unhelpful to have a time frame. It's more to look at the manifestation in the person and how it shows itself in their lifestyle.
Thank
does
you.
That make
yes,
sense?
that's answered. Yes, thank you. That's quite
okay.
Good.
Anyone else?
I've asked if anybody would like to ask a question in chat if they didn't want to do it verbally, but also I know that a lot of patients can actually feel survivorship guilt and dealing with that.
Yes, that's a really, really challenging one. I think a lot of people feel that it was unfair. As I say, this was often I get the comments, this was a really good person. They were really such lovely people. Why did it have to happen? Why have I been left behind? And that comes with some of that anger that I spoke about. people say, like, and I get this from, it's not survivorship, but I get the why me from both sides. Okay. And I guess I don't have a slick answer to that. I have a very fairly how can I put it, out of the box answer. So when people say to me, why me? My answer is, why not you? And that makes people stop and think, okay, why do I think I'm immune from things? Why do I think it's not going to happen to me in my life? Why would I think I shouldn't survive? Why do I think I shouldn't be alive and enjoying things while my partner or family member has died? Why do I think I need to punish myself? Why shouldn't you survive? Why shouldn't what? So I guess that gets them to explore why they're asking the question of why me? Why am I left behind? Rather than giving them a rational explanation, because firstly, there is no rational explanation. Secondly, the question is not rational. It comes from emotion. Yeah. So I try to stay away from then in that instance of telling them all the reasons why they should be pleased. The person's out of pain and all the standard responses, and try and go a little bit deeper. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I do things a little bit out of the box sometimes, because I find the standard responses they've heard so often, and it really is become somewhat trite.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's no one shoe fits all, and it's working through the individual's emotions and working, getting the grassroots of why they're feeling like
that. Yes, and I find that question makes them stop and think, why do I feel like that? Why do I feel I should be the one who's sick or has died? Or why do I feel I need to not enjoy myself? Why me? Why not me? Okay, so that, I guess, even with some of the diagnosis of cancer, they say, I've had so many who say, we've lived healthy lives, we've eaten well, we've exercised, why me? Okay, and there is no answer to that. So my answer tends to be, why do we think we're immune? Why not me?
Yeah.
We are all that, and that in a sense that allows us to think and allows us to realize and acknowledge that we are all vulnerable. This can happen to anybody, and does happen to anybody.
Yeah. And I think sort of where Joyce had asked about timeframes and everything like that, and I think sort of coming back to looking at all the emotions and anger, sort of finding out the reasoning behind the anger. Yeah. The one thing there is that not everything we do in life has meaning, but everything we feel has a meaning. Perfect. Have we got any questions? Joyce, have you got another one?
Well, I'm going to ask the question, what about people who place shrines in the corner of a house for their loved one? How do you deal with that? Or how good or bad is that? Does it make sense? There are
absolutely. I've seen so many, and look, people. I guess the first thing is that I try to look at whether it's cultural, because or religious, faith-based, because there are some cultures and some religions that will have that, and it is very comforting for people. But then I also reflect on the culture I grew up in, and I grew up in Pakistan as a Christian. Okay, so especially in a Muslim country, was it in itself unique. But the funeral, when someone died, I wouldn't say funeral, the mourning period, when someone died, the body was kept in the house, in the coffin, in the house. We had no funeral parlors. There was no sanitization of death. There was no sending the person off to be dressed. The person was dressed, clothed, and everything by family members, kept in the house, and people visited the house with food and sat and prayed and sat together and talked and laughed and, had a glass of wine or whatever it was going, alcoholic, non-alcoholic, cup of tea, whatever it was, for 3 days. That was your standard, okay? In 3 days. And I still look at lilies and I feel, oh, I can get the smell of coffins and bodies. But when I say to people, I grew up around dead bodies, they look at me astounded. What do you mean? But that was the culture. So it really depends on why the person is doing it and what the meaning of it is to them. It's in a way no different from funerals. I think funerals are really, really important. They are rituals. They help the farewell process. They help this on the first stage of saying goodbye. If they are not cultural and they're not based in faith, then I think I would be talking to the person about what it means to them, because it could be part of their mourning process, or it could be holding on process, the holding on to that person via this. If they've kept a whole room that is untouched and a shrine to the person, then I'd be very worried. And if suddenly not initially, in the first couple of weeks, people often do have, they are able to clear out the cupboards, the wardrobes, the clothes, etc. That's fine. But if it's I can say even 6 months, because I know people who have had that, who've done it for 6 or 8 months later, they haven't been able to say it. I think I would be asking what the meaning of, what does it mean to them to have the room kept as a shrine or a shrine to the person. I know people who've kept photos and they put flowers near the photos each time. Do we call that a shrine? Do we call that a memorial, a memory of them? So it also depends on our definition of a shrine. What do we mean by that? Because I think, well, I'll set this up now. I think Western society has a very sanitized version of death, and we're very, and in most Western countries, people are very afraid of death. And you notice I actually most of the time will say death and died, and very rarely say passing away. Very, very rarely say passed away or lost to us. Because I think it's real. Passing away. I read an article in the Sydney Morning Herald, Good Weekend, about a few years ago, where the woman said, people say passed away, my mum has passed, your mum has passed. And she said, no, if she's not passed, because if she's passed, she can return. If she's gone past me, she can return. So wow. She's not passed, she's gone never to return. She is not coming back. She is dead. And that is heartbreaking, but it's also real. And when it's real, you can deal with it. When you use different words, then it's really hard to deal with it. So when it's a shrine, I think when we see it as a shrine, we need to find out how the person sees it. What does it mean to them?
Thank you.
Great. Anybody else on the call? I won't use names, but anybody else on the call that would like to ask any questions? No. Okay. Well, I'd like to say thank you so much, Crystal. It's been fabulous, and you've gone through so much. And I actually had a look to see when Kubler-Ross did her stages.
Did you get a year?
1969 was when
69.
she yes.
67, but 69.
69, yes. I could not remember, but I know it was one of the first things that I studied in grief and loss, and everybody made a really big deal because it's the first time it was actually clearly delineated and documented and identified as something to be looked at, and it was really revolutionary at the time.
It was, yeah.
Yes.
And I think also the fact that she sort of said that you can pass through each of the different phases and go backwards and forwards. And
yes.
It's not, you didn't have to follow those 5 steps. That,
yes. Yeah.
At any time you could.
At any time you could move backwards, and you do move backwards and forwards. And you think you got to the end point and okay, I've accepted it, and suddenly something happens and you feel angry all over again.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think she was also the first person who identified anger as part of the grieving process, because I think anger is, people often see it as a negative emotion. And I think that's very sad. It's really quite a positive emotion. As long as you don't act on it, it's actually quite positive.
Mm.
It's a strong emotion. It's a powerful emotion. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, again, thank you so
Thank you.
much.
That's
Yep.
okay, no problem. If people have any questions down the track, you can put them through Meredith. I'd be happy to, send an answer through Meredith if you want, or a link to whatever. Meredith, I might just email you this the 2 models if you're interested. Or
Yes, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
okay, all right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you.
Lovely. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Turn my recording off.